All right, welcome folks. Hi from around the state. I hope you are safe, and if you're here, you must have some form of power. It's been a really brutal night for a few of us around the state, so I hope this is finding you well. I want to say Happy New Year. The California Climate and Energy Collaborative team is pleased that you're back. I want to welcome you to the 15th meeting of the Local Energy Resources Network. And 2023 seems to be kicking off with quite a bang. In fact, there's so much to talk about that we've got speakers from two agencies today. So we get to hear from Caltrans and DOE. So let's get into it. As always, go ahead and change that slide. As always, we would love to see you if you want to turn on your webcam, and you don't have to worry about taking notes unless you'd like to. We're going to be sharing a lot of links, and then there'll be resources that are provided after this via email. You'll get the recording and the slides. And lots to talk about today. So as always, this is an hour that we spend together. It's designed to provide space for local governments and those that work with them to dive in on programs and opportunities that can help you advance your energy and climate goals. So while you all are out there busy doing the work, we are scanning to make sure we know of everything that's coming your way that can help make that a little bit of an easier lift, get some resources behind your efforts. And so today we're going to do our usual opportunity roundtable. We're going to spotlight an opportunity from Caltrans. They actually are here visiting with us today. So they're going to do spotlight on one of their programs coming up. And then we'll hear from the DOE. Now the DOE came and talked to us back in September. They're here again today to talk about the EECBG program, including the new competitive guidelines for the EECBG program. We actually have some opportunity here today because they're in an open comment period to provide some live feedback on that set of guidelines. So, action-packed meeting. Let's go ahead and begin. Next slide, please. So, as always, we always have so much to talk about, and 2023 is going to be wild. So, we always store all of our opportunities on our funding resources page, and that's going to be updated later today. Here are some of the things we want to make sure that you are aware of. So things got a little quiet around the holidays, right? Which is great. But in 2023, we're really starting to see a lot of these programs that we've seen coming a mile away starting to hit the streets. So it's a good time to be grant ready. The first one we want to mention is what we've been talking about for a while. We saw this one coming. From the DOE, it's called the Resilient and Efficient Codes Implementation Program, and it was $45 million available for that program, and the official deadline's not out until I think March, but the concept paper needs to be submitted by January 31st, and so that's coming up here pretty quickly. If you're a codes person, this is something that you might really take advantage of, and it's active, it's live now. The other one that is about to be live, we're actually going to talk about it next. So that's the Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grants. Folks in the survey and in these meetings have been telling us they want to hear more about transportation-related opportunities. And this is a really good one. And so we're going to hear about that next. I won't talk about it much here, but you've got a couple of months there for the solicitation window, starting on Thursday. Some of these other ones we've been talking about. You will see a link here in the chat. I wanted to make sure y'all are aware there's some more information coming out of the IRS from the Consumer Clean Energy Tax Credits. Those are now live. And so if you're looking for information about what's available, then we have a link to share with you. And then on the horizon, right? So we've been talking about EECBG. We're going to talk about that a lot today. So both the formula and competitive solicitations are expected in Q1 here in 2023. We're going to hear all about it in just a moment. And then a lot of input opportunities, right? So we've been talking about usually it's policy first, and then there's some machinations that these agencies go through. Oftentimes they're looking for input on their guidelines as they create them, and then it turns into a solicitation. So before solicitation, we have these input opportunities. So today, consider today an input opportunity for the EECBG competitive program. And John will be adding the competitive guidelines here so you can actually be taking a look. I think he sent them earlier by email as well. The DOE also has a couple of really really good programs for this particular network. So they're related. One, they have issued right now is an RFI, and it includes their state-based home energy efficiency contractor trainings. And so this is going to be a grant that's available for home energy efficiency contractor training. Some of you do this work. This might be a really good one, and you may actually really want to comment on the guidelines and make sure this program is designed in a way that you can take advantage of. Those comments are due January 26th. Now, what I wanted to ask here in the chat is if anybody can share with us, if you'd like, are you working on comments for that particular RFI? I know a couple of agencies that are, and it's possible that you might want to find each other and collaborate on some of those comments. So use the chat for that if you'd like to see if you can collaborate. And then related to that program is the Home Energy Rebate Program. So this is money that's coming out of the DOE through the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a good chunk of money. It was $9 billion. And almost 600 million of that is getting allocated to California. There's a summary that we will share. We actually have a meeting coming up soon with folks at the CEC to talk with them about how they are planning to design their proposal for their allocation for these programs. So this is going to be a program that's targeting energy efficiency and electrification, and this is work that a lot of you guys do. What we're really hoping to see is some collaborative program design concept that really incorporates all the value that local and regional agencies have to offer here, because you've been doing this work for so long. There's also going to be listening sessions that the DOE is hosting over the next month or so on this program as they finalize their guidelines. The other thing to keep a watch out on, and I'm just talking about the things that are in yellow highlights, is a listening session that we're going to be conducting. So this is in progress. This is going to be a SEEK listening session in partnership with the California Air Resources Board, and it's going to be a good conversation, generally addressing obstacles to local climate action planning. So we're going to be reaching out to folks to see, the local government folks, to see if that's something that you would be interested in participating in and giving some meaningful feedback to CARB about how they can help. And finally, a big one that we're going to keep our eyes on as it approaches is the Strategic Growth Council's Transformative Climate Communities Program. This is always a big dollar opportunity and a complex application. And the really nice thing this year is they have TA available to help support grant preparation, because it's targeting disadvantaged communities and they're aware that it's a little bit of a difficult lift. And so round 5 is on its way. You can get TA now. And in fact, there is a grant support workshop, or a set of grant support workshops that's going to be happening through February. And so we'll put that link in the chat as well. Lots of stuff coming, guys. So hopefully you found some good grant writing friends to hang out with you for this year. Okay, so with that, let's move on to our first speaker of the day. And folks, I wanted to say also, if you haven't already, if you haven't introduced yourself in the chat, please do. And if you know of other things that folks in California that are your peers would benefit from knowing about, it could be any kinds of assistance, funding or events, or are you putting on something that they would benefit from participating in, throw it in the chat. We'd love to share. All right, now I'm going to hand it over to a couple of speakers from Caltrans who we reached out to. They're gracious enough to provide a short presentation on their Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant. And so really pleased to now welcome Odemi Ibrahim. She's the Caltrans planner for climate change planner, and Priscilla Martinez-Velez, and she is a grants program manager for Caltrans. They both, I believe, work in the Office of Air Quality and Climate Change. They're leading climate change vulnerability assessment studies. And we get to hear all about this program. So I'm going to hand it off to you all. Thanks for being here.
Okay, and thank you so much for having us. I know there's a lot of funding opportunities coming at everybody as we speak. And so I am Priscilla Martinez-Velez, as Angie mentioned, and I work in the Caltrans Division of Transportation Planning. And I actually work in the Office of Regional and Community Planning. So Odemi and our offices, we work as a team to deliver this grant program. The fiscal year 23-24 grants are headed your way. Our release and call for applications will be on Thursday, January 11th. Next slide, please. So just really quick, the overview, and just to let you know exactly what we're trying to accomplish with these funds. All of our planning grants that we award through this program, they all must have a very strong transportation nexus. And that's per our California Constitution. And what that means is basically all of our grants have to directly benefit our multimodal transportation system. And that is all modes of transportation. So thinking about bicycles, pedestrians, transit, and any motorized vehicle, cars, trucks, and even trains. So a lot of different modes to cover here. The grants are intended to strengthen the economy, promote equity, and protect the environment. And that's all in line with our government code for our state planning priorities. Like I mentioned too, all of these grants should be leading to the programming and implementation of transportation improvement projects. And for some of our agencies, like transit agencies, it could even mean like a transit service improvement. And so anyway, next slide, please. So here's the funding. We have three basic categories of grants. We have sustainable communities. That's a total pot of $29.5 million. Primarily through Senate Bill 1, that was passed way back in 2017. And then we have this one-time fund for $50 million in climate adaptation planning grants. Those were recently enacted along with our state budget for this fiscal year, 22-23. And then last but not least, we have our federally funded strategic partnership grants. Those we're not going to cover today. We're going to cover the top two, those that we felt, for sake of time, that would be most relevant to the group here today for local governments. But those are, different eligibility and primarily for metropolitan planning organizations and regional transportation planning agencies throughout the state. Next slide, please. So for sustainable communities, like I said, this is primarily through Senate Bill 1. The main purpose of this grant is to fund regional multimodal transportation and land use planning, so very integrated planning. And it's intended to further the regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy or alternative planning strategy, and that's pursuant to Senate Bill 375. I believe that was enacted way back in 2008, and also to contribute to our state's greenhouse gas reduction targets, address the needs of underserved communities. So we have a goal of 50% of all of our grants to benefit underserved or disadvantaged communities, and of course also assist in achieving achieve our mission and our grant program objectives. Our objectives are based on a lot of state plans and priorities, such as the state transportation plan, and then of course other, a whole host like the state's aging master plan, things like that. Next slide, please. So this is a quick slide just to show you like who's eligible to apply, as not only primary applicants, but also sub-applicants. So for any of our agencies that are wanting to partner. So for the primary applicants, we have the metropolitan planning organizations. There's 18 of them in California, but they have to apply with a sub-applicant. And that's because they get other funds. And in the breakdown here, they receive that formula budget on the far right column there of $12.5 million. So we say it's great if they want to apply to the competitive pot, but they have to have a partner on their application or a sub-applicant. Regional transportation planning agencies, the RTPAs, they're also eligible to be primary. And then transit agencies, cities and counties, of course, Native American tribal governments, and other public transportation planning entities. A good way to know if you're eligible to apply is to look in your bylaws, and if you have the authority to do transportation planning, you're eligible to apply. As far as sub-applicants go, same thing, all primary applicants could also be sub-applicants, of course. In addition, universities, community colleges, CBOs, or the community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations, and other public entities. So the main idea here is that these funds are intended for public and government organizations to do their transportation planning. The competitive budget is $17 million, and out of that pot, $3 million is set aside for technical projects. So those projects that aren't really appropriate to be involving the public in such a robust fashion as the other, all the other sustainable communities grants. And then we have a $500,000 set aside for tribal governments, and that's new for this cycle. That set aside was established in consultation with a lot of tribal governments who were involved and the Caltrans Native American Advisory Committee. The minimum is $50,000, the maximum is $700,000. And like I said, we also have that formula budget for MPOs only. And their allocations are based on population and other factors, but primarily population. And then we have a local match requirement. I know it seems odd, but it is 11.47%, and that is a percentage of the total project cost. So you take your grant amount request, your local match, and then you have your total project cost. That local match is a percentage of that total, not the grant amount. Next slide, please. And now I'll hand it over to Odemi. But first, Odemi, let me just say one more thing. If you're looking for example project types, because there are some similarities between sustainable communities and adaptation,
yeah.
But sustainable communities is more focused on greenhouse gas reduction, so complete streets, transit planning, transit-oriented developments, and things like that. So anyway, thank you, and I'll pass it off to Odemi.
Thank you, Priscilla. So I'm just going to quickly run through this. We have 2 more minutes. So the purpose of the Climate Adaptation Planning Grant is to fund local, regional identification of transportation-related climate vulnerabilities through the development of climate adaptation plans, as well as project-level climate adaptation planning to identify adaptation projects and strategies for transportation infrastructures. And just to reiterate, 50% of grants is allocated towards the benefits of underserved communities. Next slide, please. In terms of who is eligible, we have 3 different categories of applicants. The first on the list for primary applicants are the Metropolitan Planning Organization. As Priscilla mentioned, we have 18 of them in California. Example will be Kent Council of Government, SANDEG, and all that. And then the next on the list is RTPAs, transit agencies, cities and counties, Native American tribal governments, joint exercise powers authorities, and last but not the least, for primary applicants are local transportation authority. The next categories of applicants include all the names on the primary applicants categories. And then again, we also have universities and community colleges, community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations, and other public entities. And then just to reiterate where we got this fund from, Caltrans received a one-time funding of $50 million in this year's state budget to fund climate adaptation planning grants under the Sustainable Transportation Planning Grants Program. The minimum grants that will be awarded is $100,000 US. And then there's a maximum of $1.5 million for any single organization. But there's an exemption that for any partnership organization, we can look at a maximum amount of $3 million and a minimum amount of $1.5 million. And there is also a match requirement for 11.47, and this doesn't affect local tribal governments. Next slide, please, for Priscilla. And I'll pass it over to Priscilla.
All right, so just really quick, and I'm sure you'll all get a copy of this presentation. Like I mentioned, on Thursday, we'll be releasing the grant guide, then we'll be conducting workshops, and all that information will be posted on our grants website in terms of workshops coming up. We have 10 district workshops all throughout the state. I believe most of them will be conducted virtually. And then the beginning of February, we'll have a statewide workshop just to catch anybody who wasn't able to attend the districts or anyone who would like to learn more about the HCD Pro Housing Designation Program as it relates to Sustainable Communities grants. So thank you very much, and we'll take any questions.
All right, thank you guys both so much for being here. We're going to throw some of the links here in the chat so folks can start taking a look. And please do put your questions in the chat, and Caltrans is going to hang around to answer those questions within the chat as we bring on our next featured guest, because like I said, there's a lot going on, so we got to talk about this other program too. But feel free to ask those questions in the chat. All right, so I'm really pleased now to introduce Odette Mucha. She is a energy programs analyst in the Department of Energy's new state and community energies program. And she's very gracious to be here today to talk to us about the EECBG program, a little update on the formula, talk to us newly now about the competitive guidelines that are out. And then we get to give her some feedback that she gets to take back with her. We are actually going to submit this recording as a formal comment to the RFI. All right, thank you so much, Odette. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Angie and John, for having me today. It's such a pleasure to be here. And hello, everyone. Thank you all for participating. My name, as you know, is Odette Mucha, and I'm with the Department of Energy. And so, as Angie mentioned, I'll be talking to you today about the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. I know it's a mouthful, EECBG, and specifically about the competitive track. So we are here to get your questions and also get your input and feedback. So roll up your sleeves. It's time to participate. Get ready to chat and get off mute at some point because we, as Angie mentioned, we're in an open moment right now to get your stakeholder input, and we really want to hear from you, get the best ideas so that we can incorporate them into our program design. So to kick us off, I thought we could start with an introductory set of questions that you can put into the chat. And so the first question I have is a controversial one. What is your favorite community in California? So you guys can battle it out. And then the second question I have is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how familiar are you with the EECBG program? I know we gave a presentation on this already, so if you were on that, you can give me a high number. If you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, just give us a low number. And so I thought I would start with my favorite community in California. It's actually really hard to pick. I did spend a wonderful year in San Francisco right after college, so I'm gonna have to say my heart is in San Francisco. I worked out there at the Sierra Club, so it was a wonderful time, but my in-laws are from Monterey, so I'll be going out there next month. So those are my top two. And don't forget to tell me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how familiar are you personally with the EECBG formula or ECBG program? Okay, I see lots of votes. And we can go on to the next slide. Okay, we got some 1s and some 2s. Okay, so I will be sure to give you the basics, and we got some 7s. Okay. So for the 7s, stick with us. We'll go really quickly through the overview. But as you know, the Department of Energy is part of the Biden-Harris administration, and they're taking climate change really seriously. They've set a goal of a carbon neutral or carbon-free power sector by 2035. And so that's a really important guiding goal for us here at the department. And what's also really interesting is that we're really taking seriously our commitment to the Justice 40 principles and making sure that as we make these important investments in this clean energy transition, we're doing so in a way that expands justice and access for folks, particularly in underserved communities. Next slide, please. So we have created a new office to help execute the infrastructure funds, and we are one of those offices, the State and Community Energy Programs Office. And so we're really thinking of ourselves as a front door to communities all across the country and as an entryway to help communities get access to DOE, the funding, and all of our technical resources. And at the same time, we're here to serve you. So you are our key constituents. Next slide, please. Quickly before I jump into the EECBG program, Angie highlighted a couple of the other programs that our office is running. So please do participate in those. If you have questions, you can always reach out to me and I can guide you to the right person. But we are helping to execute the home energy rebates program, as well as some workforce training funding. So there's a request for information out for that one, as Angie mentioned at the top of the webinar, due January 26th. So we'd love to hear from you on that. And the home energy rebate program will be having listening sessions and a RFI coming out later in the spring. Okay, so jumping into EECBG. The EECBG program is, next slide, please. The purpose is to provide funding to states, local governments, tribal governments all across the country to do three things. As you can see here, reduce fossil fuel emissions, reduce total energy usage, and improve energy efficiency. And so this is the second time DOE has run this program. The first time was under the Recovery Act. So if you've been in government for 12 years, you may have been familiar with it then. This time around, we have a much smaller pot of funding. So we're thinking of it this time around as not necessarily the end all be all source of funding for energy efficiency for communities, but more of a seed grant. So you can kind of springboard off into greater things. And it's a way to help access perhaps other sets of funding to do a lot of the investments that we need to decarbonize our economies. But one great thing about EECBG is that
the other one.
It is pretty flexible, and there are quite a few activities that could be covered under this program. So next slide, please. You can see here there's 15 activity areas, and we can, I think is what makes it pretty unique. So you can go from strategy and planning development all the way through deployment of clean energy technologies, and that includes energy efficiency, renewables, as well as transportation. We can help you with building codes and inspections to electrification campaigns. Really, the sky's the limit on this grant, more or less. And so we're excited about that unique role that we can play alongside some of the other larger funding grants, and potentially have some flexibility to help fill in some gaps that some of the other grants might not be able to fund. Okay, next slide, please. So we are also thinking about ways we can supplement the funding with these two approaches here. So one is called blueprints, and this is just thinking about ways that we can help our grantees, so local communities such as yourselves, to walk you through some, ideal projects and programs in your community. And we're really thinking thoroughly about the technical resources we can provide to everybody across the country so that we can make the dollars go much further. In addition, we realized that this time around the funding, the amounts might be pretty small, especially if you're a smaller community. And so we thought about ways administratively to help ease the burden of applying to a DOE grant. And so one avenue is to get a voucher for technical assistance. So let's say your community is smaller in size or population, and you might be getting, say, $75,000. So instead of applying for the cash, what you could do instead is ask for a voucher, and you would get technical assistance at the value of $75,000. So for example, you could hire or you could receive technical assistance to execute an electric vehicle planning analysis for your community, or a building electrification analysis as another example. Basically anything along those 15 topic areas I mentioned previously. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, great. So as I mentioned on the top, there's two tracks for the ECBG program. So the first is a formula grant, and that's applicable to over 2,700 entities. So every state, territory, and most of the Native American tribes and local governments over a certain size and population. And formula means you're automatically eligible for the funding. As long as you submit your paperwork to us, you'll get the funding amounts which have been allocated by Congress. And on a separate track are the communities that are not included in the formula side. So essentially, if your local government, so your city or county, and the population is too small to qualify for a formula grant, you're eligible to compete for the competitive track. And in addition, you can see here that the states will be receiving quite a big chunk of the funding, but they have to reallocate up to at least 60% of that to this second track. So the communities that cannot receive a direct formula grant. So on the next slide, I'll go into just hopefully make it clear as to which bucket your community might fall into. Next slide, please. So just to recap again, so local governments on the left side, you'll see here are those that are eligible for formula allocation have to have cities of a population of over 35,000 people, or they're in the top 10 highest populated cities in the state. Or if you're a county, it's over 200,000 people, or if you're in the top 10. And then alternative 2 is that your straight up population is over 50,000 if you're a city, or over 200,000 if you're county. So the flip side of that is going to be on the competitive side. If you're a city with less than 50,000 people and you're not in the top 10 highest populated cities, you're eligible for the competitive track. And if you're a county with less than 200,000 people and you're not in the highest 10, then you're also eligible for competitive. And one last thing I'll mention on the competitive side is that what it means to be a competitive grant is that you would submit an application, and DOE will assess them and award winners. And things that we'll be looking for will be determined in the next several months. And so this is where your input is going to be really valuable. We're interested in hearing what you all think we should be prioritizing in terms of how we select the winners, so to speak. And any other thoughts you might have on the best ways to select the projects. So two other things that I'll mention on the competitive track. One is that we're thinking about soliciting consortia of local governments to apply, meaning if there are several communities that come together, then we would encourage that activity so that the impacts can be much larger than funding a single local government. And then the second one is looking specifically at states with smaller populations. So that's not applicable to this group, but that'll be kind of a second priority that we've been considering. And so the statute is pretty limited to those two areas, as well as thinking about the kind of overall impact of the proposed project. And so that would be, thinking about the greenhouse gas emissions impact or the energy savings impact. So I think beyond those criteria, I would be curious to hear your ideas on what should be prioritized. And then the last, I have a lot to throw on that I didn't actually write on this slide. The last distinction I'll make is around the funding sizes. So for the formula, you know, if you're a smaller community, you can expect, oh, the allocations are all published, and I have a links to those further on in the slides. But if you go to the EECBG website, you'll be able to see how much funding your community has been allocated. And the minimum is $75,000, and it ranges all the way up to several million if you're a large city. Now, on the competitive side, we have 8 million in total, and we expect to give out about 5 to 12 grants in total. So the funding sizes might be a little bit larger on the competitive side in order to try to impact a larger sort of scale of change. So that was a lot of information, and we'll have a chance to answer questions. And I'm trying to think if there's anything I forgot, but let's go to the next slide. Okay, here's some of those program design elements. So on the competitive side, 15 activity areas, focus on consortia and communities in small states, as I mentioned. Again, I spelled out the link to the request for information. Basically, if you Google EECBG, you'll find our website, and then you'll easily see the link to this request for information. And essentially, all you need to do is send us an email. So you don't have to worry about too much all of the text in that document. If you send us an email, the email address is listed here, EECBG_RFI_competitive@HQ. That'll come to us, and that'll be counted as an official comment, and we'd love to hear your ideas. A few bullet points is fine, and you don't need to spend too much time in it. The other thing I would add is the deadline is this Friday. So it's a soft deadline, you know, we want to hear from you, but anything you send in by this Friday would be great. Okay, and then one last thing that I would add in before we switch over to frequently asked questions is the concept of technical assistance. So we're really, as I mentioned, we're thinking thoughtfully about how we can support communities through, you know, writ large, and EECBG might just be the entry point. And so we're thinking about opportunities for communities, you know, to work on their planning all the way through execution and deployment. All right, so with that, we can go to the next slide. Okay, thanks. So yeah, some of the questions. How do I know if my community is eligible for a formula or competitive? Again, go to our website, ECBG webpage. You'll see there's allocation tables. They're PDF documents. Scroll until you find your organization's name. And if you're not there, then you're not eligible. And then okay, so the next question, my community is eligible for formula grant. Now what do I do, right? There's a couple things you can do now. One is fill out an optional information collection form. So tell us what your plans are, what your thoughts are, what your needs are. It's optional, but it's going to be really helpful as we design some of these other programmatic elements. We anticipate releasing application instructions and kind of all of the program guidelines soon. And so keep your eyes peeled on that website for additional information. If you have any specific questions that we can't cover today, feel free to send us emails at that email address. And then the final question that I thought of is that, well, my community is eligible for the competitive track. Now what should I do? Again, submit your ideas via the RFI, and then look out for additional information on how to apply later this spring. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to hear your questions.
Thank you, Odette. I'm going to do one thing here, because after we're done with Q&A, we are going to go to Jamboard and start providing some input on some specific questions Odette is raising for us that are from the RFI. And if you don't have time to complete the RFI, then you can just submit your comments now. So here's that Jamboard. We're going to get to more instructions on that, but if you want to get a head start, feel free. We're going to take some questions now from the audience, the ones from the chat. I'll start with Leslie's question. She was asking, when will the strategy and action blueprint guides be published?
The strategy action guides will be published in the next few months.
Next few months. Okay. And then I think you might have answered some of these questions by the end, but Marna's asking, when will the paperwork for the formula grant go out? It did go out, so folks know when their allocations are, but they're waiting for their solicitations to come out. So when's that coming out, and when's it going to be due again?
It will be coming out in by the end of this month. So just keep an active eye out on our webpage. And the application deadline, it will be a rolling deadline. And so if you're ready to hit submit, you can do so starting once our application instructions are released at the end of the month, approximately. And if you need more time, we're anticipating to provide about 12 months to submit your application. So there's no rush on this one.
Oh, great. And that's going to be an application directly to the DOE. And then you mentioned that some funds will come to the state. Folks are asking about how you access those.
Each state will have their own process. So they'll have some time to get their applications into us, and then they'll have some time to figure out their own system. So every state will be different.
Yeah, so, folks, I think we're going to continue to talk to the CEC and find out from them what their process is for coming up with their concept for what they will apply for and how we can get involved. And then one more question from Marna. She's asking if we can draw it down all at once. I think she's talking about the formula grant, or if it needs to be invoiced by deliverable.
That's an excellent question. And I'm not sure at this moment, but I would submit that to that email address that I provided, eecbg@hq.doe.gov, and we'll get a response out to you.
Okay. Thanks for all those good questions. Christine's got a couple questions, maybe more comments. We'll see. So she said, basically small communities that have less staff, especially rural, have to compete. She's questioning about, how is that equitable? And I'm wondering if that's a consideration. I think this probably came from statute. Maybe you didn't have a lot of wiggle room in this round of EECBG.
Yep, that's Congress decided. And so we're hoping to be able to cover smaller communities, again, in those two ways, one through the states, and then the other one is through the competitive. And we're definitely keeping in mind that smaller communities have less capacity. And so I think there will be a lot of value in teaming up if that's possible. We're not, but it's a great comment. And, I think it's something that it would be great for folks around here to hear from you directly. So feel free to submit it as a comment to the RFI, but I think it's a fair point.
Yeah, and she's asking about, will there be any TA offered for the competitive application? I think that's something you're considering in the RFI even, right? And we're going to talk about that next.
TA provided in the application. Yeah, I think that's it's something that people have spoken about. I'm not sure if we've landed anywhere on that yet, but it's a great question, and we'll certainly make note of that request.
Yeah, Christine, when we get to the next section of the Jamboard, you might want to throw that in. There's a board on TA. Heather's asking how many jurisdictions eligible for Formula EECBG funding are wondering how and when they will hear about the application process for accessing their allocation. Oh, okay. You already spoke to that. Yeah, I think you answered that. Annie's asking, is the application something we are going to need a grant writer for? How challenging is it? And maybe, I think you're asking about maybe formula and competitive, Annie. But go ahead, Odette, if you know the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't think you'll need a grant writer. For the formula side, it's everybody will receive their funding. So it doesn't have to be perfect, right? In that you don't have to make a very compelling argument or amazing visuals or anything like that you might want to do for some other grants. That said, there are a lot of requirements, not necessarily on the application process, but in just the responsibility of managing a federal grant. And so you'll need to make sure you have your accounting system set up. And, if this, for example, is your community's first federal grant, there'll be a couple of things that you need to make sure you have set up in terms of auditing and kind of financial tracking, things like that. So I would say it's not insignificant to manage the DOE grant or any federal grant. But we're hoping that the application process for the formula isn't too onerous. On the flip side, if you really don't have the time to submit a grant application for formula, you always have the voucher option, which will be a much more streamlined approach. And you'll not receive, again, you wouldn't receive cash, but you would receive technical assistance in lieu of a grant. And all of the kind of, I'll just put a caveat on everything. The formal final version of all of these ideas will be coming out later this month. And so I would say nothing is final until you see the final version of the documents, but that's kind of the current thinking.
Thank you, Odette. In the interest of time, I know that we could talk a lot more about with Q&A. I'm going to move us into the feedback section because I want us to spend a little time getting your input. Now, $8.8 million isn't a huge amount of money. If you looked at the guidelines already, you might have noticed that it's talking about, one of the priorities being smaller states, but California is not excluded as long as there are energy savings that can be demonstrated. Right, Odette? So don't get discouraged about that portion of the guidelines. They would be very happy to see applications come from California. So we have a few questions that Odette has posed in the Jamboard. We put the link there, maybe we throw it there again. I'm going to give us a couple of minutes. I want everybody to spend a little brain time here on any of these questions that you feel like you can answer productively. You don't have to answer all of them. There's 5 questions total. As I'm reading them out loud, just go ahead and breeze through and start plugging in any information you have. So the nice thing about Jamboard is everybody can provide input at the same time. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to say your feedback out loud, and you can put something in the chat and we'll drop it into the Jamboard. If you want to put something in the Jamboard, just double click to add a new note and write a little short note right there, and you can move it around. So the first question here is on partnerships, and Odette's asking us 2 questions here. What external partners or stakeholders will be critical to the success of your community's energy goals, and what are the best ways to get their participation? So go ahead and start dropping comments as we're reading these out loud. And again, raise your hand whenever you feel like you have something to say. And they don't even necessarily have to fit into these questions if you have other feedback based on what you've heard. How can DOE best facilitate the formation of and sustainability of consortia to participate in DOE grant programs? A lot of you guys already operate in consortia. So maybe you can give them some advice about how yours operate and how they are sustainable and what DOE can do to support that. And then there's a couple of questions. If you go to the next board, if you scroll over, it's on technical assistance. Which programmatic area is your community mostly interested in? Technical assistance or resources? Is it energy planning, building energy efficiency, building electrification, renewable energy, electric vehicles, workforce development, resilience? Anything else? What do you need TA for? And then another one here, what types of technical assistance would be most effective in helping your community and partners maximize the impact of your work? And so they're talking about TA. I think this is the TA maybe in lieu of dollars, but also this might be a place to put your comments about TA in terms of grant preparation or how they can help support grant preparation for communities that are small and have a hard time with competitive grants. And then finally here, another one on technical assistance. What else should DOE be doing to support communities? I guess this might be even a better place to put a comment like that. Just generally, what else can DOE do to provide TA through this EECBG program? I wanted to point your attention finally to this last board. This board is something we put together. So because the competitive program here is very, it's emphasizing the role of consortia, we wondered if anybody wants to drop something here, drop your own organization and maybe even your contact information, if this is something you want to connect with others on. in terms of considering a concept or a proposal alongside other communities. Tricky part here is you don't necessarily know off the top of your head what other communities are getting a formula allocation and are sort of out of contention for the competitive solicitation. But if you're interested in partnering up, finding some friends, put a note here, and this will be the way you guys can connect with each other. Okay, so let's go back to the first board and see. Oh, good. Folks are already dropping some thoughts. And Odette, I'm going to invite you to chime in here as you see something that's interesting. John, are you seeing anybody with raised hands here? I don't see anybody with raised hands yet. Feel free to raise your hands, folks. I'm just going to read some things out loud. So on the external partners, critical to the success of community energy goals, landlords, we're seeing require local governments to have funded partnerships with nonprofits and CBOs that serve EECBG and disadvantaged communities. So that's sounds like a requirement. Let's see, only 8 to 12 competitive grants for all of California in the US. That's not clear. Oh, I think that is true. I think this is the role where maybe emphasizing consortia really makes sense. Odette, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, it's 8 to 12 competitive grants for the US. And then in addition to that, California will be sub-granting. The state will be granting out to local communities as well.
Great.
And we do also have a raised hand from Nick Peterson.
Oh, hey, Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, for a federal program, that's minuscule. I thought we were talking about only California, which is still minuscule. But is this really all DOE is doing for the whole federal thing, or is there more stuff coming along?
It's a fair point, and you know, I think Congress decided the funding allocation, so we're just going to do our best to make this as impactful as possible. To your second question, this is certainly not the only thing DOE is doing on climate and clean energy, and where it is unique in that we are reaching quite a wide number of communities, and so we're hoping that it's just the start. For many places, it might be the first time that they're engaging with us as a department, or their particular local staff might be engaging for the first time. So we're thinking of it as like the beginning of a nice friendship. And the new State and Community Energy Programs Office is really thinking strategically about a long-term vision about, you know, how do we actually support communities from wherever they might be now to full a clean energy transition. So we hear you that it's not very much funding, but we're hoping that it'll be impactful, is, you know, greater than the sum of its parts, partly through technical assistance.
You know, I could chime in. The last time ECBG came out back in 2009, it was a much bigger dollar amount. So 2% of the total, you know, the statute says 2% is competitive. That was a much larger dollar amount the last time. It's just the same formula on a smaller amount. And productively in this conversation, what does that mean for California communities? If they really want to hear from, I would say, our rural or smaller communities, well, how can a proposal come together that might actually serve multiple of those communities that don't have access to the formula funds? And who can help lead that process? Who can connect those dots? I'd be interested. And what comes of this, it's worth submitting an application here from California. Okay, let's see. So folks are talking about capacity building, funding for social impact networks that include local governments. So a lot of folks are trying to encourage this to include not just local governments, but some of the other critical partners. And then somebody suggesting templates with language for consortium agreements, financially support consortia coordinators. Yeah, and then somebody agrees with that. Financially supporting consortia coordinators. That's a great idea. Okay. Is there anything else here that you're seeing, Odette, that you want to highlight or dive into a little bit more before we move on?
Well, I do see the program capacity capacity building. And so that's getting a lot of pluses. And so we can talk about that on the next section as well. You know, the way we think about capacity building from the DOE lens is technical assistance. And so if that doesn't make sense to you, like, well, what is the kind of thing that DOE could do to build up that capacity for local communities, local governments, and your important partners? What does that look like to you? What's an example perhaps of a great program that you enjoyed in the past that you think DOE should replicate?
All right, well, you know, this Jamboard is going to stay open. So if you want to spend any more time giving more thoughts to any of these questions, we'll take it. We're going to go ahead and submit that along with this recording as a part of our comment. And with that, I want to ask Odette, is there any last remarks you want to make before we move into our last little segment?
No, we just really appreciate your participation in your thoughts and your comments and feedback. The door is open, so don't be a stranger. If you have opinions or you want to have meetings or whatever it is that you need, we're here. So really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Odette. And I hope that's useful to get this additional update on the formula side as well, because you've got that to contend with, a lot of you, and then to hear about the competitive grant. Maybe not as large or as accessible maybe as you'd have liked to see, but an opportunity nonetheless, and one that California has access to, I think, with maybe a smart approach to serving multiple communities. So I'm excited to see what comes from that. With that, let's go ahead and go back to our slides, and we'll just take our last couple here before we bid you to adieu. One thing I wanted to mention here, so in terms of what we're up to at SEEK, a lot of things. As a reminder, we've got to save the date out for our California Climate and Energy Forum next year. It's going to be in Santa Rosa on June 13th and 14th. So save the date, plug it into your calendar if you would. And then a question for you.
Angie, can I really quickly, in addition to that, we will be launching our call for such proposals process very soon in the next 2 weeks. So be on the lookout for that and start thinking about any proposals that you might want to submit to this year's forum.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, so somebody's asking about the date. That's June 13th and 14th, 2023 in Santa Rosa. That's the SEEK forum. Okay, and one question I had for folks, just inviting you to send me a note here. We have been working with some agencies and some local governments that are really interested in seeing a better approach to doing GHG inventories and talking about other obstacles to local climate action planning. Like I said, we're going to have a conversation with CARB about this in the coming months. And I'm wondering if you are part of a local government or consortia of governments that is doing something on this front. Are you already leading any advocacy at the state level on this? Or is this a big priority for you? If so, we would like to partner up with you and connect the dots in some ways with some communities that are taking the lead. So if you would, just go ahead and email me if this is something that maybe you've already got your lobbyist on, or it's just maybe it's part of your policy platform, legislative platform for the year. Let us know. We would appreciate it. Well, with that, I want to say a big thank you to our speakers again, Odemi, Priscilla, and Odette. Thank you for your time. We so appreciate when agencies come to talk to us and get our feedback, answer some questions. We wish you guys luck as you are out there starting to apply for some of these programs. We're going to meet again on February 14th. We're still taking input for our LERN survey. If you can help us make these meetings even more impactful, we would love to hear your thoughts. And feel free to share this invitation with others. We keep liking to grow this network and make sure that we're giving everybody as much of a heads up on all these opportunities as we possibly can and get more feedback to the agencies that need it. Okay, so thanks so much again for your time, and we hope you have a great rest of your month.